I grew up in a small town, and that meant that we had to make our own fun. My friends and I spent nearly every afternoon after school playing games in the wide, open fields behind our houses. We lived near an old farm where the previous owners had passed away, and their children did not want to take over the property, so the place was abandoned, with those rows of tall corn that grew wild and unchecked. It had become our playground over the years, a perfect spot for hide and seek. For us, it was a world of adventure and imagination. You could get lost in there, and sometimes that's exactly what we wanted. I was always the best at hiding. I liked slipping away into the rows of corn, the soft rustling of leaves covering my footsteps, and knowing that no one could find me. It was thrilling in a way that made your heart race, knowing you were hidden, but not alone. One afternoon, in particular, sticks with me more than any other. We'd just finished school, and the late summer sun was already beginning to set. I was with my usual group of friends, Tommy, Jenna, and Catherine. It was Catherine's turn to seek, and as usual I found a spot deep in the field, crouching low behind a thick wall of corn. I could hear the others laughing and running through the stalks as they hurried to find their own hiding spots. The excitement of the game always made time blur, and I remember closing my eyes for a moment, listening to the faint breeze rattle the leaves around me. I couldn't hear Catherine anymore. She must have started counting. Ready or not, here I come. Catherine's voice rang out across the field, and I smiled, knowing she'd never find me here. I stayed perfectly still, waiting for the game to unfold. Moments passed, and I began to hear footsteps again, the swish of corn stalks being pushed aside as Catherine moved through the field. It was hard to tell where she was exactly, but that was part of the fun. She would occasionally call out in a playful voice, pretending to know where we were hiding. Then the footsteps got closer, much closer. I leaned forward a little, peeking through the stalks, expecting to see Catherine's silhouette moving through the corn. But I didn't see her. The sound was there, the soft crunch of footsteps, but there was no one in sight. Tommy? Jenna? I whispered, but no one answered. I thought about moving to another spot, just in case, but something held me still. That's when I heard the voice, a low, rumbling sound that didn't belong. It wasn't Catherine, it wasn't Tommy or Jenna. It was deep, almost like a growl, but it formed a name, Catherine. It was right behind me, only a few feet away. I hadn't seen anyone come near, hadn't heard anyone approach that close. The cornfield was dense, but I should have been able to see them. My breath caught in my throat, and I didn't dare turn around. I told myself it had to be a trick, maybe Tommy trying to scare me. But the voice was wrong, too low, and it said her name again, Catherine. I scrambled to my feet, pushing through the corn, my heart thudding in my chest. I stumbled out of my hiding spot, breathing hard as I ran back toward the open field where we'd started the game. I didn't stop until I broke through to the clearing, where the golden light of the setting sun felt like a lifeline. Tommy and Jenna were already there, sitting on the ground and laughing about something. When they saw me, they jumped to their feet, startled by the look on my face. What's wrong? Did you guys hear that? Did you hear someone calling Catherine's name? Jenna squinted at me as if trying to decide whether I was playing a joke or not. No one called her. We were waiting for you. I thought you were still hiding. I was, but there was someone else in the field. I heard them. They were right behind me. Are you sure? It's probably just your imagination. You always freak yourself out in the cornfield. I shook my head. My hands were trembling. No, it was real. I swear, it wasn't any of you. It was someone else. Jenna stood up. Maybe you just got scared because it's getting dark. I wanted to argue, to insist that what I'd heard was real. The voice had been so clear, so close, but when I looked back at the cornfield, it seemed so still, so quiet. I was starting to doubt myself. But then Catherine got out of the field. I heard it too. Her voice was shaky. We all turned to look at her. Catherine had been the last one to come back. She stood there, staring at the cornfield like it was a stranger, no longer the familiar playground we had always known. What do you mean you heard it? Tommy asked. When I was looking for you guys, I heard someone call my name too. It wasn't like us, though. It wasn't playful. We were silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. The sun had already set completely, and the cornfield felt ominous rather than comforting. It's probably just some farmer messing with us, Tommy said. Catherine shook her head. No, it wasn't a farmer. There was no one there. We stood there, staring at the cornfield, waiting for something else to happen. But the field stayed silent. The wind was moving through the stalks like it was mocking us for being scared. We should go. It's getting late, Jenna said. We agreed, none of us eager to stay any longer. We gathered our things and made our way back to the road. I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched, though every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just rows and rows of corn, standing tall and silent. That night, after I'd gone home and climbed into bed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, and the fact that Catherine had heard it too made it all the more terrifying. For weeks after that, we avoided the cornfield. No more games of hide and seek, no more daring each other to go deeper into the stalks. We stuck to the open fields where the light was bright. But every now and then I would catch Tommy or Jenna looking toward the cornfield, as if they were waiting for something to emerge from its depths. Eventually, life went back to normal, and the memory of that day faded into the background. But even now, all these years later, I can still remember that voice vividly. When Evelyn and I booked a weekend getaway at a remote Airbnb, we were hoping for some peace and quiet away from the city. The listing described a cozy cabin nestled beside a vast cornfield, perfect for unwinding and recharging. After months of non-stop work and stress, it seemed like just what we needed. The cabin itself looked great in the photos, and the reviews were glowing. The host, Gary, seemed to be the type of person who took pride in his place. Spotless, one review had said, incredibly well kept. Another mentioned that Gary made sure everything was perfect for his guests, down to the last detail. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The sun was beginning to set, casting this golden glow over the cornfield. The cabin was exactly as advertised, charming, rustic, and secluded. It had everything we needed for a relaxing weekend. We unloaded the car, settled in, and before long we were ready to explore. Evelyn suggested we take a walk through the cornfield. It looks so peaceful, she said. Plus it'll be nice to stretch our legs after the drive. I agreed, so we set off down a narrow path that led through the tall stalks. As we wandered deeper into the field, I couldn't help but feel a little on edge. Something about being surrounded by those towering stalks, blocking out the view of anything else, made it easy to lose track of direction. As we walked, we joked about horror movies and the typical cliches that come with being in the middle of nowhere. We didn't take it seriously. After all, we were just here to relax. But then, a few yards ahead, something caught my eye. It was a small, dark shape on the ground, half hidden beneath the corn. I paused, stepping off the path for a closer look. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, stopping beside me. At first, I wasn't sure. It looked like a pile of debris, or maybe a clump of leaves. But as I crouched down to inspect it, I realized it was a small, lifeless animal, a rabbit. Its fur was matted and a thick, dark line cut across its throat. "It's dead," I said. Evelyn leaned in for a closer look. Oh my God, what happened to it? The cut was clean, too clean. This wasn't the work of another animal. It looked like it had been killed deliberately, with a knife. "Let's head back," I said, suddenly feeling uneasy. But as we turned to go, we found another animal, a larger one this time. A deer, and its throat cut just like the rabbit. It looked like it had been dragged into the field and left there. "This is messed up," Evelyn said. "Who would do something like this?" I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was hunters? But no hunter would kill animals this way and just leave them. And why would they be using a knife? We hurried back to the cabin, not wanting to stick around and see what else we might find. The sun was setting fast, and the cornfield started to feel ominous. As soon as we stepped inside, I locked the door behind us, more out of instinct than anything else. We didn't talk much after that. The discovery of the animals had killed the mood, and now we were both on edge. We decided to wait until Gary showed up to check in on us. He'd mentioned in the listing that he'd like to stop by and make sure everything was going smoothly for his guests. Maybe he'd know what was going on. Sure enough, an hour later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there was Gary, a friendly-looking man in his late 50s, dressed in a plaid shirt and jeans, yet a calm presence about him. "Hey there," he said with a smile. "How are you two enjoying the cabin so far?" "It's great," I replied, "but we found something in the cornfield." Gary's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, what did you find?" "Some dead animals," Evelyn chimed in. "A rabbit and a deer. They were cut up like with a knife." For a moment, Gary didn't say anything. Then he let out a small sigh. "Ah, you found them, huh?" Gary stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Look, I wasn't planning on telling you about this, but I guess it's better you know. I'm the one who killed the animals." Evelyn and I stared at him, not sure if we'd heard him right. "You killed them?" Evelyn asked. "Why?" Gary shrugged, like it was no big deal. "It's just something I do when guests are staying at the cabin. Keeps the place clean, free from pests. I don't want any wild animals creeping around, causing trouble while you're here." I blinked, trying to wrap my head around what he was saying. "You kill the animals to keep the place clean?" "That's right," Gary said, his tone matter of fact. "I've been doing it for years, keeps things peaceful. You don't want a bunch of wild animals roaming around when you're trying to relax, do you?" Evelyn looked horrified. "But that's horrible. You can't just kill animals like that." Gary raised an eyebrow. "Why not? It's for your benefit. I do it for the guests. It's part of the service. You wouldn't believe the mess it can cause if you let too many animals get too close to the cabin. Trust me, I've seen it." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man, our Airbnb host, was casually admitting to killing animals just to keep things tidy for his guests. It was sick. "We don't need that kind of service," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're fine with the animals being here. We're in the countryside, after all." Gary chuckled, but it wasn't the warm, friendly sound from earlier. It was colder, almost condescending. "You don't understand. If you don't manage the problem, it gets out of hand. I'm doing you a favor. You don't want to see what happens when nature takes over." I exchanged a look with Evelyn. We were both thinking the same thing. This wasn't right. "I think we'll be leaving tomorrow," I said firmly. "We appreciate the stay, but we're not comfortable with this." Gary's smile faded, replaced with a look of disappointment. "Suit yourselves. But I'll tell you this. You'll never find a place as well kept as this one. You'll thank me someday." After Gary left, Evelyn and I packed our bags in silence. Neither of us wanted to stay another night, not after what we'd heard. That night we barely slept. Every time the wind rustled the corn outside, I imagined Gary out there, roaming the fields with a knife, looking for his next cleanup job. The thought of it made my skin crawl. By the time morning came, we were more than ready to leave. We didn't even wait for Gary to stop by again. We never went back, and I haven't stayed in an Airbnb since. Because no matter how many glowing reviews a place has, you never really know what kind of person is running it or what they might be hiding. We were dumb kids, always looking for a thrill, especially on the weekends when there wasn't much to do in our small town. You know the type. Small community, quiet streets, and the nearest mall was 45 minutes away. Cornfields stretched for miles in every direction, disappearing into the horizon. They'd been a backdrop for as long as I could remember, but we hardly paid them any mind. We were just there. But on this particular night, we made the worst decision of our lives. We decided to sneak into Mr. Wilkins' cornfield. It wasn't the first time we'd messed around in the corn, but there was something about doing it at night that felt different. The idea came from Connor, of course. He was always the one who pushed things too far. "Come on," he'd said with a mischievous grin. "I dare you to go in the corn at night. You know it'll be creepy as hell. Besides, everyone says Wilkins' field is haunted." I rolled my eyes at the idea, but in the back of my mind, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something to it. It was stupid, really. No one believed in ghosts, not seriously anyway. Still, when the whole group, Connor, Jace, Taylor, and me, it was easy to get pulled into that kind of thinking. It was the thrill of it all, the chance to prove we weren't scared, that we could do something crazy and come out the other side laughing. So we went. It was a Friday night, and the crickets were out in full force, their chirps filling the otherwise still night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting everything in a faint silver glow. We snuck across the road and hopped the wooden fence that separated Mr. Wilkins' property from the road. The corn stretched out in front of us, tall and dark, swaying slightly in the wind, like it was alive. "Last chance to back out," Connor taunted, looking over his shoulder at us. None of us said a word, but Taylor hesitated. She always had that look when she wasn't sure about something, like she wanted to say no but didn't want to be the odd one out. We teased her about it all the time. "It's just corn, Tay. You'll be fine," Jace said, nudging her forward. And so we entered, the stalks closing around us, forming a living wall that blocked out the world behind us. The sounds of the town faded, and we were left with just the rustle of the corn and the faint crunch of our feet on the dry soil. At first it was almost fun. We made jokes, laughed, and even pretended to scare each other by jumping out from behind the rows. But after a while, the laughter started to die down. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the silence became. The corn seemed to stretch on forever, the stalks towering over us, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. That's when we heard the whispering. It started soft, so quiet that I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us. But then it came again, clearer, like someone was standing just behind the next row, talking in hushed tones. It didn't make any sense. No one else was supposed to be out there, not at this hour. "Did you guys hear that?" Taylor asked. We all nodded. "It's probably just the wind," Jace said, but he didn't sound convinced. He looked at Connor, hoping for some reassurance, but Connor was staring at the corn. The whispering continued, growing louder, but we still couldn't make out any words. It was a constant murmur, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. "Let's go check it out," Connor suggested. He spoke with that familiar, reckless confidence he always carried in situations like this. He started forward before any of us could argue, pushing through the stalks with purpose. The rest of us followed, though a lot less enthusiastically. As we moved closer, the whispers increased, as if they were aware of our presence. They seemed to come from all directions now, swirling around us, filling the air. I could see Taylor getting more and more anxious, her eyes darting around as if she expected something to jump out at us at any moment. That's when we realized someone was missing. "Wait," Jace said, stopping dead in his tracks. "Where's Connor?" We all stopped, looking around, but he was gone. One second he'd been leading the way, and the next, nothing. I called out his name, but my voice felt small, swallowed up by the rustling corn and the strange murmurs that filled the air. "Maybe he's messing with us," Taylor whispered, though her voice trembled, trying to freak us out. "Connor," I called again, louder this time. Nothing, just the whispering. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Every time I tried to focus on the source of the whispers, they seemed to shift, like they were moving through the corn, leading us further into the field. "Let's get out of here," Taylor said. "We'll find him back at the road." But Jace shook his head. "We can't leave him out here alone." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to go back, to get out of that damn cornfield and never come back, but leaving Connor behind didn't feel right either. We decided to split up, even though everything inside me screamed that it was a bad idea. Jace and Taylor took one direction, while I went the other. The corn closed in around me, and soon I couldn't even see them anymore. It was just me and the whispers. I moved slowly, listening, trying to pick up any sign of Connor. But the deeper I went, the louder the whispers became, filling my ears, pressing in on me. It was like they were trying to tell me something, but I couldn't make out the words. They were too jumbled, too distorted. Then out of nowhere I heard a rustling ahead of me, and I stopped, holding my breath. Something was moving through the corn, something large. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, the weight of its presence bearing down on me. "Connor?" No answer, just the whispers. I took a step forward, and that's when I saw him, Connor, standing just a few feet away, his back to me. He flushed over me, and I called his name again, but he didn't turn around. "Connor," I shouted, moving closer. "Come on, man, this isn't funny." Still no response. I reached out to grab his shoulder, but before I could touch him, he turned, slowly, his eyes wide and distant, like he wasn't really seeing me. "Connor?" "Shh," he whispered, cutting me off. "It's waiting." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about? What's waiting?" But he didn't answer. He just stared past me, his eyes unfocused, like he was seeing something I couldn't. And then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the corn. I called after him, but he didn't stop. He just kept walking, disappearing into the rows. I didn't follow him. I don't know how long I stood there, listening to the whispers, trying to process what had just happened. But eventually, I turned and ran, pushing through the corn, back toward the road. When I finally made it back, Jason and Taylor were waiting for me, their faces pale and drawn. I told them what had happened, but they didn't say anything. We didn't talk much after that. We just left, hoping Connor would show up on his own. Eventually, Connor went back to his home alone. We found him the next morning, sitting by the sidewalk in front of his house, staring blankly at the ground. He didn't say a word, just kept muttering under his breath about something waiting in the corn. He never told us what he saw that night. And every time we mentioned that day, he'd get angry and shut down the conversation. A while later, I moved away to college and ended up losing contact with him. There are moments in life when the world around you seems to slow down and everything becomes terrifyingly real. For me, that moment came when I couldn't find my son Luke in the cornfield. It had started as a regular autumn afternoon on our farm. Luke, who was 5 at the time, loved being outside. He was one of those kids with endless energy, always running around, climbing things, and getting into every nook and cranny he could find. The cornfield had always been his favorite place to play hide and seek with me, darting between the rows, giggling as he tried to stay out of sight. And I didn't mind. It felt safe. We lived in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by miles of our own land, so there wasn't much to worry about. That day, though, things were different. I remember calling out to him after a few minutes of not hearing his laughter. At first, I wasn't concerned. I just figured he was playing his usual game, trying to stay hidden. "Luke, come on out, buddy. Let's go inside and get a snack." But there was no answer. I wandered closer to the edge of the field, looking between the tall stalks. "Luke, come on. Time to go." Still nothing. That's when I felt the first twinge of anxiety, a kind of quiet nudge in the back of my mind, telling me something wasn't right. I stepped into the field, brushing the corn leaves aside, and peered deeper into the rows. Luke? Usually he would have popped out by now, laughing at how well he'd hidden from me. But there was only silence. I started moving through the rows, pushing the tall stalks aside, calling his name louder. It felt like I was walking in circles, my voice bouncing off the thick walls of corn. The field was massive, stretching out far beyond what I could see, and while I knew every inch of it, something about the way the corn loomed over me that day made it feel endless, like I was lost in a maze with no exit. I forced myself to stay calm. Kids wander, I told myself. He's probably just gone further than usual. But as I moved deeper into the field, I caught a glimpse of something that made me stop in my tracks. Through the gaps in the rows, I saw movement, something or someone a few rows ahead, slipping quickly between the stalks. My heart leapt in relief, assuming it was Luke playing his game of hide and seek again. But then I realized it was too tall to be Luke. I stood frozen, staring at the spot where the figure had been. It had been brief, just a flicker of movement, but it was there. I waited, expecting to see Luke run out or call my name. Nothing. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, but I didn't move. For a second, I doubted whether I had actually seen it, or if it had been my imagination, but I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been there. Luke. I yelled again, louder this time, the worry creeping up to me. "Come out now!" Still no response. I hurried forward, pushing through the rows more urgently now. Every time I thought I heard something, a faint rustling, a footstep, I'd stop and listen. But every time I did, the sound would stop too. It felt like I was chasing ghosts through the field, following echoes that led nowhere. After what felt like forever, I stopped again, catching my breath. That's when I saw the figure again. This time, it was clearer, a dark, shadowy form slipping between the corn rows, just out of sight. But it wasn't running, it was moving slowly, and it was leading me further into the field. My stomach knotted as I realized that whatever it wasn't Luke. It wasn't even human. My feet felt rooted to the ground, but I couldn't turn back. I had to find my son. I started moving again, faster this time, weaving between the rows as I called out for Luke. The more I walked, the more disoriented I became. It was like the field had swallowed me whole. The light had changed as the sun began to set, and the figure, whatever it was, kept showing up just ahead of me, always slipping away before I could get close. At one point, I stopped dead in my tracks, realizing that I hadn't heard Luke's voice in what felt like hours. No laughter, no cries, nothing. The only sound was the wind through the corn, and that eerie rustling that seemed to follow me wherever I went. I called his name again, but this time it felt more desperate, like I was calling out into a void. And then I heard a faint sound, almost like a whimper. It was coming from behind me, back the way I'd come. I took a step toward it, and then I saw the figure again, closer this time. It was standing still, right in the middle of the row, facing me. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel it, watching me. The whimper came again, and I knew it was Luke. I bolted toward the sound, not caring about the figure anymore, just needing to find my son. I tore through the rows, cornstalks scratching at my arms and legs, until I finally broke through to a small clearing in the middle of the field. There, huddled on the ground, was Luke. His face was streaked with tears, his body trembling. I rushed over to him, pulling him into my arms. He clung to me, sobbing, and I felt a wave of relief so powerful that I could barely breathe. "It's okay, baby. I've got you," I whispered, trying to calm him down. But as I held him, I looked up, scanning the cornfield around us. The figure was gone. The shadowy presence that had been stalking me through the rows had vanished without a trace. "Mommy, there was someone here. They were following me." Luke's voice was shaky. I looked into his frightened eyes and my heart sank. He had seen it too. "Did they hurt you?" I asked. Luke shook his head. "No, but they kept telling me to follow them." A chill ran through me. "What did they say, Luke?" "They said they wanted to show me something." But I didn't want to go. I wanted to find you. I hugged him tightly, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Whoever had been in that field with us had tried to lead my son away from me, away from safety, and I had almost followed it too. I didn't waste any more time. I scooped Luke up in my arms and started making my way back through the cornfield, not caring about the scratches or the exhaustion. All I wanted was to get out of there, back to the house. The figure didn't show itself again, but I could feel its presence lurking just beyond the edges of my vision, watching us. When we finally reached the edge of the field, the sun was nearly gone. I hurried inside, locking the doors behind us, and spent the rest of the night holding Luke close, afraid to let him out of my sight. I never figured out what had happened that day, who or what had been in the cornfield with us. But I do know one thing: it wasn't human, and whatever it wanted, it wasn't good. We moved away from the farm not long after that. I couldn't stay there, not after what had happened. Even though I've tried to put it behind me, I still think about that day, about the figure in the cornfield, and about how close I came to losing my son. If these stories made you second-guess every rustling leaf, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. Got your own eerie cornfield encounter? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your scary experiences. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on the next scare. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.